Awesome. What's up, Gino? Man, I like to hop straight in every time. So, what are you working on? What's sort of going on in your room?
The room where currently we've been mucking around with some seated guard stuff. We're kind of just sticking with that, trying to like work between seated guard and when our partner works to standing up, trying to connect seated play to connecting to our partner's hips and bringing them down. Just giving people like a few different options in terms of like showing them some connections when they're in the seated position, letting them like muck around with connections, and then trying to like let them see how they go obtaining those connections to the shoulders when they're in the seated position. And then if our partner goes to stand, looking to try to connect to the hips and stuff like that. Just trying to, I think, blend like all areas of the game together for them. So it's like less segmented and they less thinking between spots, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's for the adults.
Okay. And is that like an all levels adult thing, or you have like the
all
same
levels
team
adult
across? Thing. Yeah, cool. And youth, is that what you're going to dive into?
Nah, youth. We're kind of just sticking with we've got three age groups. We teach for 2-year-olds to 4-year-olds, but those kids, it's just very much just loose play, coordination, gross motor skills, all those kind of things. But then the 4-year-olds to 8-year-olds, we just keep it very, very, very basic. And then we're doing a lot of like closed guard work with them. It's like keeping your partner's posture broken. See if you can put them down on their butts if they stand up. And for the other kid, don't put your hands on the floor. See if you can stand up, kind of stuff, some closed guard things. And then the kids above that, we're working some mount stuff. Just like trying to work to like a gift wrap position or a variation of that. Just how can I pin wrists, keep my partner down, all that kind of stuff. It's going well.
How long have you been like implementing or working with like CLA, eco style stuff?
Since late last year. It's been a pretty cool journey. Late last year, I started mucking around with some stuff after having done, reading, watching things for a few months, and just like initially starting out as hearing this message, this new approach, or not a new approach, but a different approach to what we've typically done, and starting out with not skepticism, but it just seemed so different to what I'd normally done, because I'd come up in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. And then, you start to read more, you listen more, and it starts to make more sense, or it starts to make more sense in terms of like, why haven't I been doing it this way the whole time? But I've got for our area, a relatively good-sized academy. We've got 300-ish members. So it's a scary thing to make that jump. So I'd play around here and there. Like one class a week, I'd kind of do more live stuff instead of the traditional method. And then one of my coaches, he's a long-time martial artist. He's a legend in our country in terms of being a martial artist, especially like jiu-jitsu and fighting. The more I read and researched and looked, the more I noticed he used a lot of those elements, like a straight-led approach in his teaching. And then one day I came in and he did a full class on it. And it might have been because of like where I was in terms of my educating myself. And I noticed, I was like, what the, hang on a second. I can see what you're doing. And that kind of gave me the balls. So like, that's it. I'm just going to go. I'm not going to, if he can do it, and he has a room where I train a couple of times a week, a room full of black belts, and everyone's just buying in and doing it. If he can do it, then I'm just going to go. At the start of the year, we went.
I love it. Man, because I think one of the things a lot of people are always like pretty interested in is like the transition. People like ask, like one of the most common things I get asked is like, yo, what was the transition like? How did you navigate it? For you, what did that look like? It sounds like you just started making classes more live generally, but yeah, give me a little bit more insight into that.
Look, I'd be lying if it didn't say like Greg is the loudest voice in the room in terms of, at least initially, with the CLA, ecological dynamics. And it's very, as someone who read a fair bit, but like I hadn't seen a lot of applications. A lot of his stuff was like, okay, that's super effective. So I honestly just jumped in. I did a few of his games and a few that I had personally created. But the way I communicated to the room, the way I would set the tasks and objectives sounded very much like Greg Souders, right? Which is I think that's a natural thing. Sometimes we mimic what we see. So I created games, and the feedback were immediate. Like, I didn't do like a bit of this and a bit of that. I just went fully in. It was all just a few games, certain positions and whatnot. And the feedback that I received was immensely positive from the adult group. And now look, it's been consistent the whole time. And I'm kind of just waiting it out just in terms of, I think novelty is a thing. So there's something new. So that's like exciting. Yeah, this is cool. It's new. But you got to wait a little bit for the dust to settle. If that makes sense, because I can't base how the successful the program is based on that initial novelty factor. You've got to let people settle into it and get into a groove, and then to see, okay, I see what we're doing. But the response it's been positive, very, very positive.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about that initial novelty. Like, everyone loves a little bit of change. You know, they think maybe we're just spicing up training for the little week, and then we'll go back to doing whatever. You know, that was one of the comments, like, one of my brown belts, like, initially said, it's like, cool, I know we'll probably, like, do this for a bit. Maybe we'll go back to the old way. You know, it's just like, as a coach, I'm always trying different class formats, practice formats, you know, different types of drills and activities or whatever. But now it's been, like, you know, 2 years straight of just sort of like playing in that way. So it's like, oh, we never actually went back. But the way it's evolved, I'm sure you've had your own evolution from how you're running sessions in the beginning to how you're running them now. What would you say has sort of changed from your like first couple sessions to like yesterday?
I don't know if this is a common thing across like a lot of the coaches who are using this method, but I started trying to get techniques to emerge. And so it was like, how do I get a knee cut to emerge? What can I do to get the knee cut to emerge? Or like this specific thing to emerge. And then now I know you've spoken about it as well, but I've taken more of a step back and more broad strokes in terms of like how I will set out a game or set out like the starting point, the objectives, the task focuses and stuff like that. More broad strokes to allow stuff just to emerge now. So I think what's changed the most is I'm probably more comfortable in taking a step back in terms of, like, I'm not looking for certain techniques to emerge. I think that's the wrong approach now, and I realised that. It took a little while for me to realise that's not how this approach is going to be most successful. But stepping back to just letting behaviours emerge, and if they fulfill the tasks required, if they meet the end point, then that is fine. That's the goal, getting to the end point. It's not trying to produce, I want this specific knee cut pass to emerge, or et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a big challenge for a coach using this method to kind of get across. It's a bit tricky initially. I think you've got to stick with it.
I mean, I think one of the primary reasons that challenge is so common is because we feel that our students, they're paying to learn discrete things, right? Like, you know, like, what did you learn today? You know, like is that a bad thing if it happens? You know, and you're one of the school owners I've talked to who has like, you know, a larger program, so that is amplified just naturally. You know, I always talk about the changeover and how it can be drastic if you just pull the Band-Aid off. Before, what was your sessions like? Were you just like, what was like an old school session?
Super
like?
Standard old school session. I would line everyone up. We'd bow in. It'd be like 5 to 10 minutes of line drills. So I'd get like 4 lines, top of the mats, go down, do all the stuff. Then we'll all sit down. I'd show a few techniques. We'd drill those techniques. And then we're going to sometimes do positional sparring. Most times we're just going to go into live rolls. And that was into infinity and beyond. I would do that every class. And I would stick with the theme. So I would choose like De La Riva. And I would like stick with De La Riva maybe for like 4 weeks. 3 weeks was like, yeah, kind of, they're getting sick of it by that point, and then I move on to the next thing, And now when I step back, Kabir, and you step back and you look at it from a longer perspective, I was doing 3 to 4 weeks at a time of a block. And so there's only 12 months in a year. So the members might only be getting exposed to 12 different things in a year. And it's like, how can you possibly get good at the whole game of jiu-jitsu if you're only being exposed to 12 things a year, let alone not being even able to practice those things in a live situation? You're just doing dead drilling, right? So It just makes this seem like the more obvious choice. It's a no-brainer almost.
Mm-hmm. Like for me, when I think of that, like I was similar. I would do units for a couple weeks at a time, and before actually I had like a split level, so I had like my foundations and an advanced or whatever. My advanced group, I was definitely doing those longer blocks, 3-4 weeks, or this whole month was open guard, sit up guard, whatever. And there's two big issues with that. One you talked about is like the exposure issue. It's like, how are they gonna in a year? I just literally don't have enough time to show them everything. If this is the method we take. And then there's the flip side. It's like, what if I'm on a topic that people just hate? Like we have had people show us moves like that's not for me. I don't think I'm going to use that guard ever. It's like, damn, and now we have 3 more weeks of it. So sometimes I think like there's this added benefit of that constant touching on broader scenarios, and focusing on different things. When it comes to your planning, so you run an all levels class for your adult program, right? How do you think about it? How do you block practice? Do you do things a couple weeks in a row? How are you thinking of that part of practice planning? Because you had your old method, which is this to the death for 3-4 weeks, and then we cover something else. What does it look like now?
We have a beginners program, and that's just 8 weeks rotating, and it's like we'll do a week to 2 weeks on an area like a side control or a mount or the back, and we'll just cycle through those, try to give people the basic exposures or the fundamental exposures to those areas. That's kind of evolving too. That's always evolving, just as you come to realize what's more important, what I might class as a fundamental, not necessarily before, but I do now. In terms of our all levels pro, I'm just cycling through now. It's kind of like 2 weeks on pinning, 2 weeks on like a guard, and then 2 weeks on submissions. But I started the start of the year that way, but as we've kind of gone on now, I'm just working on more just interleaving, like bringing stuff back that we've touched on before, trying to like mix that back in, trying to get them as much exposure in as many spots as possible, if that works. And so the way that I'm structuring kind of classes now, it's kind of little block, big block, little block. And I try to have, what I mean by that is, and I try to have it all in somewhat look like a role might look like. So we'll potentially start standing, and we'll do some variation of guard play, and then leading to some pin or a submission. And it might not always go in that order. It might go in the reverse order. It might chop and change. But the little block, I'll use that to kind of get the class warmed up, to say. So it's like some variation of, if we're in the gi, because we teach gi half the week as well, the variations of grip fighting, using grips to move our partner and get closer, etc. And then I'm going to transition that to potentially, that'll be a shorter period, 10 to 15 minutes. Then the big block, that's where that's going to be our focus area. So this week we're focusing more on like Darce chokes and head and arm strangles. So that I'll spend that big block looking at that area. It might be the how to get to, the how to finish, or the how to get out, and just all areas surrounding that. And then we'll do another little block at the end, and that might be some kind of little transition piece or some kind of pinning piece. So it's like little block, little block, and all the classes go for an hour. And I'm just trying to get them touches in as many spots as possible.
Right. Within each of those blocks, are you a fan of doing, because I always like to hear people's thoughts on this. Some people really like to play a series of different games, or activities on one focus. Others would prefer to play the same sort of activity but have different partners, or that type of variation. What do you lean towards?
I lean towards both. I believe in like partner changing I like to have a high amount of partner changing. I think that variability is good. I think it's good for the room as well, like getting people interacting with different bodies and different people as well. I think the community aspect, that's been one of the biggest benefits. So I'm big on variability in partners and the games. It just depends. Like I'll quite often in a spot I might have 3 games, and like we'll go for like a standing game example. So in the gi, it might be a game where we're going to have, all right, just you start disconnected, you're going to look for two dominant grips. Two dominant grips might represent like a high collar grip and a sleeve. If you get those two grips, you hold it as long as you can, and we'll do that for 3 minutes. And then we'll go to the next game. Okay, if you achieve those two grips, you have to try to get torso to torso contact. The other player's goal, we're working on the skill, trying to break the grips. Okay, and then we'll just, if you can break the grips, achieve your own grips and do the same thing. And then the last one might be, okay, now if you've gotten to torso contact, try to get your hips in front of your partner's hips, make them touch the floor. So it's in the same area, but little progressions, and I might do that. And depending how it goes, if the first one looks a bit, I don't know, I don't like how it looks, or I think they could do that same thing again, then it might be a partner change, or I might not go 3 minutes, might go a minute and a half and go a partner change in between. I think it just comes down to the room, how the room looks on the day, and what I'm really wanting them to focus on, if that makes sense.
I would be curious for you. Like I know my sort of thoughts on this, but what influences that decision for you? Whether so we're gonna work standing engagement, and we want to work on a series of games, versus standing engagement will work one game with many different touches with different partners. For you, what sort of helps you weigh which one is more beneficial, or not beneficial, but which one you want to use that day as the approach for practice?
Look, I don't know. I think that I put a lot of thought, probably too much thought. I'm a big overthinker, so I'm the Hodger Gracie of overthinking, Kabir, I tell you. So I put a lot of thought into the sessions. Session by session basis, especially watching the rolls, you're seeing what tendencies are looking like. We're focusing a lot on hand fighting at the moment. So when I program a class now, I just like, what's my session intentions? And then I list those intentions, and then I have possible games. But I'm trying to give myself the freedom to alternate from that path and not be too married to that path, because I've gotten a bit stuck in the weeds when I've been married to the path. So, for example, of those series of games, if initially I could see that people were struggling with the grip breaking, using the grip breaking mechanics, or they were struggling with just the general hand fighting. Okay, if I just felt like we need to stay in that area a bit more, I'm happy to just sit and we'll do that one again. Get a new partner. Okay, I'm happy to do that 3 or 4 times and not progress whatsoever. I just kind of like you have to read your room, and I think knowing my room pretty well, knowing our members, if I'm just not feeling like, I don't know if that answers the question, but if I feel like we're not the behaviors don't look a little bit how I want them to look, then we'll just stay in that one spot.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. For me, just to share sort of like the way I try and tackle that is, it's a lot less about how the room looks, because I'm okay with the room looking like shit, to put it. For me, I tend to make that decision based on how variable is this thing that we're about to have them do, in the sense that if this is like a more backed out open guard game, the variety of ways that people are going to engage in this is the real value. But if it's something more, a more, not finite, but a narrower situation, like a chest-to-chest pinned half-guard game, like, they don't really need many touches, because the amount of things that'll happen in that exchange, I feel, can be, like, narrower, So for me, that tends to be, like, my primary sort of thing when I start thinking of that. It's like, okay, so which way do I want it to go? Should it be mad partner changes, or should it sort of stick and play, stacking? For me, that's just sort of how I've, been thinking about it so far.
Would you like, I don't know what your process is for planning practices and whatnot, but would you like preset that before the practice began, or are you just going to do that live in the moment? In terms of like, I want this many partner switches, I want this many X, Y, and Z. Do you have that preset, or do you just like go how you feel?
Man, so nowadays I would say I'm not like I'm not planning, but I have my plans. Okay, so if I see this room and I know their exposure to this whole scenario is lower, will probably steer towards more really finite task games and do a series of them. Whereas if I know, hey, this room either has played this a lot, or I can tell that they're pretty comfortable here, maybe I'm more inclined to do something that's going to be more humans, rather than more tasks. Is when I think of it like that. So yeah, like you said, it really comes down to the room. Every day, it always comes down to the room, right? As a coach, that's sort of your primary thing, is who's in front of you. Because I think one thing we can do, and I know I did this very much so in the very beginning, is I had like very detailed lesson plans. All the things that I wanted them to be able to focus on and take away from it. And now I'm just like the complete opposite. I have some scenarios maybe I think that are going to be valuable for us to get some like awareness points in, but what and how we do that, it might evolve. Like I'll have a couple activities for each. Like I might have 3 standing activities that I could do, and I might only do 1, or I might only do, number 2 of the 3 that day. Just sort of based on the vibe and the energy of sort of what you're seeing, and because I think that's the big thing, is you really have to be responsive all the time. That's probably the most important element of taking on coaching in this way, is you have to be just engaged with what's happening in front of you. For lots of coaches, and if you think of going from like more of a coach-centered mindset to an athlete-centered, right? When you're coach-centered, you coach for the room that you want, right? When you're athlete-centered, you have to coach for who's actually in front of you in that moment. Yeah. So you can come with the best game plan and thought process, and if that's not who's there, then you gotta be able to tweak and see, okay, what are the new constraints or what are the new conditions we want to focus on. Sometimes I'll just completely wing it. Not wing it, but, I'll have to do a big pivot, a big audible to get what they need. I actually had a question for you. You mentioned you have a beginner program, right? 8-week cycle that they sort of rotate through. How do you, when do they move on from that for you? Like, what is your benchmark? How is that structured? What's that funnel look like for you?
That's an interesting question, Kabir, because it was a bit of a challenge point for us, for me and my coaches, because we would have this class, it starts at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it goes for 45 minutes, and it's done, okay? And it's nice and easy. You're home before dinner, you can help the wife, or you can help the husband put the kids to bed, right? And so we've had members just want to stay and do that beginners program again and again and again and again. So in terms of getting them to the all levels class, there has been a bit of a challenge in terms of sometimes it's nice to just tick that box and say, I did my jiu-jitsu, I'm home for dinner, I can still watch a movie with the wife or the husband, okay? So that has been a challenge. In terms of when someone's ready, what I've just been in the habit of going to certain people and just saying, hey, I think it's time to do all levels. But that has been rare. It's mostly been me. I'll wait for them to come to me, because I feel like if the member or the student comes to me and they kind of say I think I want more, I think I'd like to do more, or I want more X, Y, and Z, that is a good indicator to me. Okay, sweet, it's time to move on to the next one. I think it's the way that those classes were structured. It was they are structured now. It's no lives, no open sparring, if that makes sense. So I'm never just okay, here's a round timer, ready, set, go. It's all live, but there's no open sparring whatsoever. So before we used to have it where we would do the warm up and do the technique, and then I would just give them 1 minute rounds at the end of class just to try to hit a side control escape or just a little snippet, and it was successful. I think it depends on the person too, because I know for myself, when I started jiu-jitsu, it would have been the same for you. There was no beginner's program. It was just jump in. If you get smashed, you get smashed. And I'm lucky that I'm 6'1" and I'm a pretty strong guy, so I never got smashed horribly. But if you're a small person or you're a female, that's tough. That is rough. So those 1 minute snippets just to kind of get a taste. The hope was that if you get enough of a taste, maybe you'd be I want to do more of the bit at the end of the class. And that's the incentive to try the all level class.
Right. So yeah, that's always really interesting to me because like I think many people have had so many different experiences coming up. You know, like our experience doing jiu-jitsu, 20 years ago is way different than what people get now. Like so
Yeah.
drastically different. Like, and it's also just the funnel of people that are interested in jiu-jitsu is way broader. Like
Way,
back in the
way
day,
broader.
if you were training jiu-jitsu, you would have probably done it in some dungeon. You probably did it in some dungeon, type of gym. Whereas
Garage.
now gyms
Yeah.
are
A literal,
beautiful.
a literal
There's air
dungeon.
conditioning. There's
Yeah.
cleaning that actually happens. Like all these things are so different. So there are those like considerations we have to make in your regular class or all levels class, let's say, you mentioned you have like, two little minor blocks, a big block. In your session, do you usually keep things pretty focused on those blocks, or where does full open rounds fall for you in your practice planning?
So the little block, big block, little block, it's like 45 minutes to an hour. That's the whole class. And then after class, it's just open mat. So I don't really spend any of my actual class as it's written on our time schedule, that 1 hour time. I rarely spend any of that class on open rounds. It's all just going to be just the games that we're going to play. Afterwards, feel free to roll. Like a couple of, we have the class that's at night because open mat can go till whenever, right? Like it's generally at least an hour open mat. Like I have morning classes and lunch classes, which are a strict hour just for those people who have to go to work or they're on a lunch break. So for those classes, I'll keep it to like 40, 45 minutes, sometimes 50, and then just give them a couple of rounds at the end just so they can like have the open round because some people they want to come and have an open round. You know what I mean? They're exhausted, but they still want to get the open sparring. So we'll give them 1 or 2 rounds at the end.
What's your thought process behind your evening sessions and having that 45-minute hour session being fairly focused?
In what regard?
In the sense that you mentioned in your evening sessions, you usually don't have open rounds in the class or in the practice. It's saved for open mat. Is that
Yeah.
what's your thought process there?
I think it's just like trying to get as much like more focused work into the member or the student as possible. And it comes back to touches as well, like touches in as many places as possible. I think it's only 1 hour, or 45 minutes to an hour. As long as I give them enough breaks, enough drink breaks, enough time to swap partners and whatnot, we can. And as long as there's relative scaling, I have to like in terms of like intensity. Sometimes I might go 3 partners instead of 2 partners. Sometimes I'll like make the rounds a little longer. All these ways to alter intensity a little bit. As long as they're not completely blown out, I think it's okay to do an hour's work. Because if you give people the freedom to just go off and have open rounds, the percentage of the member or the student that's going to be able to have intentional like learning for those open rounds where they're going to be able to go and be like, I want to work on X, Y, or Z. The percentage of students in the member base that are going to have intentionality there is very, very small. So I think as a coach, my responsibility is to try to like get the work done here, all right? Like get as much focused work as we can done here, and then feel free to go ahead. Start wherever you want. You know what I mean? You want to start 2 players in turtle? I couldn't care less. Open rounds, do your thing. But for this 1 hour, let's try to get the work in.
Yeah, I subscribe to pretty much the exact same thought process. Like, my hour practice should be about helping you get better and see more of the game and feel more confident in different slices of the game. Though sometimes as a school owner, I'm like, yo, how important is it for them to just get to fuck around and have fun and do a full round and connect their positions and like have that sort of element too? And when I think of it, I'm like, oh man, that definitely is valuable for a student. Like you love open sparring, and like if you are time constrained, because a secret thing too is in the evening, a lot of our students are still time constrained. It just happens that they don't have to go back to work, but they still have to dip out after the class, So I've been thinking like, okay, so I can see that there's value in having, full rounds. How can I make that either more useful? Like, what can I do to guide them through that, Is it, and that's something I've been playing with and thinking about. I haven't really tried to guide them when I do it yet, but I'm like, oh, what would it be? Is it look for this more often than you usually would? You know, sometimes a simple phrase like that can guide someone, or is it reminding them of more broader conceptual things to think about? Or, you know, like that's something I haven't really played with is sort of directing their play of the whole game when it comes to open rounds. You know, I feel like maybe that's something that I need to work on. Probably, admittedly, 100% I need to work on that, because that's such a big part of it too, is when you can play the full game all at once and manage, and how do I help you with that, you know? Something I haven't explored, but I don't know if you've thought about that at all, of how you could make full open rounds have that same value as the directed work, in terms of like your influence on it.
A little bit I have, I think. I think it is like, for me, we've only been open for 3 years. I know you've been open for a lot longer than that. So we have still a relatively new academy, and we have still a disproportionately large amount of newer people, newer players. So it's, sometimes I feel like, and this could be because I'm the Hodger Gracie of overthinking, but like, it could be like, I'll get to the end of like 45 minutes to an hour where I'm like, okay, guys, back. We're going to set this new position. We're going to like work on this. We're going to go from here to here during that time. And sometimes by the end of it, I can see some of my people, especially like the higher belts, who are like, okay, all right, here we go. Like new position, new constraint. Okay, like you can see they're doing the work in terms of like their task focus is great, intentionality is great. But you can just see it's like, okay, bro, we're just like, I'd love to just like feel free and just like do my inversions, go upside down, do the crazy stuff that I'm trying to work on. You know what I mean? And so sometimes by the end of that hour, I feel like, okay, I've said enough. They've put, like, I can see they've done the work. Okay, like go and go do your thing. And then I think for myself, I roll a lot with my students. I try to roll most classes, especially at nights. But I also will do a lot of sitting and observing. And then it's just like, for me, I can see what we've been working on, what they've been working on in the sessions, instantly starting to be applied in their live roles. And that for me is enough, where I'm like, okay, cool. I think we're hitting the mark here. Sometimes I will like do a bit of a try to do this or try to do that or try to do whatnot. But then sometimes I've spoken so much, or I've given them so many tasks over that hour. I'm like, are they going to tune me out a bit? Are they sick of hearing my voice at this point? They're just going to go and roll. And if that's the case, that's the case. As long as I feel like I've done the right thing during that 1 hour session. Do you ever get that feeling?
Yeah, you know, you can see where it's like, should I introduce a new one? And sometimes, you know, in that situation, I'm like, you know what? We're just going to do the same one, but this time switch every time. Or like, you know, so I don't have to give them new tasks, new information. We can just run it back, or, you know, more commonly what I'll do when I sort of see I hit that point is we convert it to like small group play. So, hey, you six are in a situation, you know, 2 stations in the middle, 2 people on the outside, just for that variety or something. You know, that's usually what I'll do when I see I've exhausted their bandwidth for more, and this is my way to still give them more. But now, hey, it's, you know, it's novel. There's a winner stays in thing. There's some other things that can make it fun and engaging again. One thing you sort of started to bring up is for feedback or coaching while they're playing. What's that look like for you? What do you find, like, both in your more constrained activities? What do you sort of view your role as when you're walking around making, you know, saying something, saying nothing? Like, what's your sort of, what are you doing in the room while they're going live?
While they're going live, initially, this isn't premeditated, but like initially I will, as they just start a task, I'll try a couple of times just to remind everyone of the task focuses. Okay, bottom player, X, Y, and Z, top player, X, Y, and Z. As I'm walking around the room, I might do that a couple of times. I'm big on encouragement. I'm big on positive feedback and positive reinforcement. So celebrating the wins. That was like, I'm big on, it helps a member as well. It helps a student to to know what they did well if it's getting celebrated at some points, right? So it's like Sarah, like that underhook, that was sick, like big stuff like that. And then if I'm noticing people like not failing, but they're just not getting to the point, like they keep getting swept, they keep falling off of the mount. What I'm working on is trying to be asking the right questions or have them ask me the right questions. It used to be initially, I'd be like, well, I think you didn't do that. Or you didn't do this. You should have done that. And now it's like, I'm trying to be more of like, why did you fall off? Like, or what do you think you keep getting swept? And then it's like getting them to take more ownership, right? More ownership of their learning and more ownership of what's happening. And I think that as people start to take more ownership, their growth I think that's when I see growth spikes. And that as long as I've been doing this, anytime a member or a student takes ownership of their growth, whether that be in terms of how they walk into the academy or zeroed in as they're trying to hit these tasks, they take ownership. I need to do this. I'm not doing that. Or they're doing this to me. I think as opposed to being like, coach, what's happening? Coach, what's happening? That's when they start to really grow and start to understand the game more. So I'm trying to be putting the onus back on them. Like, what do you think that happened? Or what didn't you do? Or what could you have done? Or what are they doing? Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely helping.
Yeah, it's very interesting how, there's two sets, there's like more than two sets, but there's several skills you really have to start developing. One is practice design, but giving feedback, the art of questioning. How can I direct their attention in a meaningful, useful way? Like, I don't want to be saying riddles either, but I want to make sure that I can give this something that they can quickly process or think about. And like, what's like, oftentimes I usually ask them like, yo, what's blocking you? Or like, little things like that. Or how can you get their head off your chest? It's like, oh yeah, I can use my arms or whatever it is. It is interesting to like watch the growth. The biggest thing I've realized is how important language is, right? Language becomes the most important skill, I feel. Knowing the grappling context and what's happening is one, because that influences how you design everything, but effective communication. How do I say things the right way? So, and I'm sure you've had it where Monday night you say something like, man, those words weren't landing the way they needed to. Like they didn't see what I thought they would see when I said that. Whether it's in the way you set up a game or the context you lay around it. Like more and more I realize that is one of the biggest things is, can you communicate,
It's huge. Yeah, I think I totally agree. I've, like you've said as well, I've cued a game on a Monday and the results were just like, it was looking wild. And it's like, for me as this coach, I'm like, okay, I know that I haven't cued this properly. And then I'll come the next day, cue it slightly differently, and the results are completely different. And I think that's a growth point for me, is I'm still trying to get better at the language. Focusing for them, telling them where to look, that is a challenge. And I think I also try to stick to, I'm not sure if it was you who said it, but I try to, when I'm setting a game, I try to like not speak for longer than 90 seconds. If I can't say it in under 90 seconds, then I don't really know. If it's not clear enough for me, it's not going to be clear enough for them. Then in saying that, sometimes if I go on too long, I'll, like a couple of times this week, I know we're moving house. We've got a ton of stuff going on, so we're very distracted right now. But a couple of times I've tried to cue things, and I can feel myself going over that 90 seconds. And not that 90 seconds, it's an arbitrary number.
Right.
But I know that I'm dribbling on too much. And then I watch what's happening, and I'm like, nah, you talk too much. It wasn't diluted enough. You didn't reduce it down to the fine words that you needed to say to cue this properly. That's a skill that I'm still trying to work on. And I think what does it come back to in your opinion though? Is it knowledge of like understanding of the invariant properties that you're trying to communicate? Is it a clear understanding of what goals you have or what goals you want them to realize? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, so that's interesting when it comes to like, what makes a quality cue, For me, I try and focus on, what's that first big objective that'll help you eventually get to the win condition, because there's so many different task focuses I could give you, in any scenario. You know, like what's that first starting point one? Because the first one is going to create the opportunity for them to see all the other actions they can take. But if they don't do that first one, the rest doesn't really fall in place. And this is where I think like this idea of like sequencing becomes really important in the sense of there's so many cues I could give you, but what should probably be the first one? You know, and that's literally probably only able to be like figured out through trial and error. But a lot of it is playing with that. Like, okay, so we can play these games about recovering to a better guard from a smashed out half guard. There's so many things I could say. What is that first objective that I really should have them focus on? Oh man, maybe it's get their head back in front of your body. Like, you know, oh, I noticed that when I say that, people have way more success than when I talk about get your arms and legs back between you and your partner. Or like, you know, like I'll play with different things and see which one really made it click for them. Because they're like, oh man, get their head back in front of my body. That could look like a lot of things, you know, in the way that they get it done. But when they do that as sort of one of their first objectives, it really does help them move towards that goal. Similarly, like I find sort of on the topic of sequencing, is the way I break down a game matters on how well people do. And what I mean by that is, you know, like I can say, yo, this is the start position, top player win, bottom player win, top player win in task focus, bottom player win in task focus, back to the start position, win, and send them off, right? Or I can sort of, not mess up, I think it's messing it up. Or I can go start position, top players win, their task focuses, bottom players win, their task focuses, and then go. Like, you know, it's very similar to, not the mistake, but think of all the times you're doing jiu-jitsu in like an older setting and an instructor starts showing a move step by step off the jump without ever showing you the whole move first. And the first time they walk through all those steps, you aren't retaining anything because you don't have a context of what's supposed to happen. It can be the same thing when you're trying to introduce like a practice activity. Like I say your win condition, all the things you should focus on, and then I go through like I've already lost. Whereas like, you know, I find there's a lot that can be done just by being really intentional. I'm like, what is the order of the information I'm going to introduce it and why? You know,
that's really interesting that you say that, Kabir, because I've been thinking about that. Probably I haven't thought about it enough to take notice of the correlation between what I say, or the order in which I set things, and then how it presents when they play the games. Mostly because I'll think about it when I program it, but then live in the moment I'm distracted. I'm thinking about 100 other things, and I'm probably not being intentional enough, not strict enough, but I'm probably not focused enough when I'm setting out the order in which I say things. Because like you're saying, sometimes I'll say it and I know I've fucking nailed it. Sorry for swearing, but I know I've nailed it because like what I see presented in front of me is perfect. I was like, that's great. But then sometimes if I've waffled a bit or I've tried to like constrain myself from waffling, so I've said too few words and I haven't done it in a good order, I can see that there's some lack of direction from either player. So what would you say was, in your opinion, like the best way to sequence in terms of like when you're cueing a game?
Well, when I cue a game, like I pretty much at this point, I usually always do it the same way, which is start position, really clearly spell out offensive, defensive player, where they are, what that broader context might be, but that's like super narrow. Top player wins by doing this, and they just do whatever the win action looks like. Bottom player wins by doing this. They just do whatever winning could look like. So, top player, goal is this. You should focus on blank to help you create the opportunities to get that win. Bottom player, again, your goal is this. You should try and focus on this to achieve that. And then we'll go start position one more time. Top player goal, bottom player goal. Let's run it.
Yeah.
And then right away when they start playing, similar to you, I try and repeat win conditions, task focus a couple times as I sort of walk around on that first go. But that's when like my formula, my thought process is if I can choose a a sort of set process for how I say stuff, I can measure. And I can see if it's good or it's bad when I go in this way versus me just sort of going like, I'm going to introduce a game. I could say it all sorts of ways. I could get caught up in too many things or too little of one guy's or the other or whatever, you know. So I've been trying to run that format. It's been really good because I pretty much base it on how confident do people look at knowing what they're trying to do. If they don't look like they know what they're trying to do, I was unclear or I was either too short or too long in one part of that. But if I can know, like, I try and only have, like, one task focus when I say it, you know, for an activity. That might influence, like, what the game is, because I know I only really want them to have one task focus. But I might also be keeping task focuses, like, in the chamber, you know, because I might play it where Gino gets 3 minutes straight, then I get 3 minutes straight. We bring it in. Let's add one or two task focus for each player, but this time, let's flip-flop every time. You know, that's another reason I really like to often play the same game multiple times is because I can, you know, I can drip focus on them. Because I really think like sequence of like order of operations matters in some ways, you know, so I sort of think of it in that sense too. But yeah, that's been sort of my basic framework of how I've been approaching that.
When I think about that, I had theories like relatively clear examples in my head, and when I've cued well and it looks good, I'm sticking to a very similar framework to what you have. And I know when it's not going well, and it could be, I think that's another thing. I think maybe because I'm only 5-6 months into using this approach as well, there's a little bit of for me at least, an existential crisis as a coach, right? Because there's a transactional thing that happens when we're using the old method, right? You come in, I give you this technique, you take the technique, even though you might have fucking 0% chance of reproducing the technique that I've shown you, you still have that feeling of the transactional thing has taken place. You give me something because you're the teacher, I'm the student, I take this thing, right? But now that's pretty much removed. So sometimes I think I'm wanting the student or the member to like take away at least some feeling of progress or like they've achieved. So I think I might be in the habit occasionally of trying to cue too much or cue in a way that they're going to hit these certain benchmarks. And then they're like, man, holy shit, I passed the guard. I fulfilled these tasks. I fulfilled the tasks. I got to the end point. Sweet. I feel good about that. And so I think that could be a reason why I'm occasionally trying to talk too much or cue it in a way because I want them to succeed so that they feel the value as opposed to like just having growth as be the primary goal. It's a tough thing, man. Like it's as a coach, I don't know if you went through it, but to go through it where you're not doing that technique thing anymore, and now you're coming in and we're doing these games, etc., etc. As someone who I value people's time, like I really value their time. They're paying for a service too. They're paying me to be a coach, and I want them to get them to feel like I'm being more of a coach now than I ever have been before. Like way more of a coach now in terms of like being engaged in the room, live in the environment, trying to tailor things to like to see growth and improvement. But sometimes, especially with like some more experienced grapplers who are just so used to a certain way, it's not that I'm trying to convince them, but I want them. I know eventually they'll see the value in this interim period. It's like, how do I get them to feel that or see that growth, or to feel that not to feel the growth, but to feel the value of what I'm giving them as a coach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's a very, very normal thing. I have one thought just going back. You know, we were talking about the times you do well and you feel like the times you don't, you try and give them more info, insights, tasks to focus on, whatever. So what I've found for me is, man, not every game needs both players to get as much attention. What I mean by that is sometimes, you know, if we're playing a closed guard game, I'm only saying the top player just has to try and get up and that's it. Get post, stand. But I might layer 2 or 3 task focus for the bottom player to work towards their goal. And, that's sort of like a great way to get that going. Because, maybe that's how you can sort of communicate what you think or feel that they should really know and like would be helpful for them in their search for, successful solutions or whatever. That's been one of my things. Because honestly, like in a lot of coaching settings, like I try and read coaching and whatever other sports, most activities are focused on one player more than the other. Even if they're still playing live and there's, perception action, all the fun stuff, and it's representative, it's sort of lean towards one person's development versus the other, right? And I think we can sort of have this challenge of like both people should be progressing, but they are both progressing. They're both getting the relevant touches. It's just sometimes maybe we're focusing more on one person's development or more on one, player's, role this session. But hey, like you probably cover things in multiple week blocks, so maybe next week it's more leaning to the top player in that guarded scenario or whatever, It's just something I've been trying to think of. Because sometimes I'm like, man, can I really get away with saying 2 or 3 task focuses for both the top and bottom player and have them do much of it either? Maybe not.
Not really. Yeah.
And then it's like the thing where you're saying like, hey, they're coming here and I want to value their time. So sometimes in our attempt to make their time valuable by giving them a bunch of stuff, we actually make it less valuable because they couldn't take it. And it might be better where we chop that in half and it's mostly all player A and you have a very simple high level thing for player B, and that's the best use of their time. Rather than thinking we need to raise both sides of that each and every day, But yeah, the expediting learning is a big thing, and seeing value. Like, how do you communicate value? And I think this is a very interesting thing, unique to martial arts. Like, if you're playing soccer and you're going to soccer practice or a soccer academy or whatever, like, I don't think you're going there thinking you're going to learn new techniques. You're going to get a bunch of practice in your core areas. But martial arts and combat, really, really just like anything that is martial artsy, okay, feels like it's about collecting moves because that is the way that it hit the mainstream, But I don't think people are going to boxing practice saying that they want to like learn new moves. Bro, there's not a lot. There's different, things we can work on to use the tools you already use, or like soccer practice. We're going to work on passing and, dribbling and whatever every day. It just sort of happens, I think sometimes that feeling is because of the way martial arts is framed. It is the master of 1,000 holds, like it is a thought. So I think that's sometimes where like we can get caught up. But I think what you want to like reframe people and when you want to show people value is it comes down to a little bit earlier when talking about being able to catch people doing well. That becomes our value then, providing the feedback on what they play more so on the new tools that I give them, right? I think that becomes sort of our shift sometimes to the coaches. Now it's about the feedback game. That's our big value. Set great activities, give great, meaningful, timely, meaningful, significant feedback comes the value, Course correcting people is the value now, nudging them towards things and away from things. That's the value more than anything. But that requires a gang of focus. You know what I mean? Like it's a different thing. It's so easy to feel valuable by YouTubing a move and showing the move. Like, boom, I know they haven't seen that one. Check. Yeah.
That's like and that was for me one of the big motivations is to change is because for so long, like two years, it was like I'm on a rat wheel where I'm just like I'm trying to bring new stuff to the room all the time. And I was, when does this ever end? When does it ever end? Because jiu-jitsu, especially the way that it's marketed now, there's big money in instructionals and seminars, etc., etc. There's always a new guard. There's a K guard, X guard, W guard. There's a Coyote guard. There's a zillion guards. And if you don't know this guard, It's like, you don't know coyote guard, bro? Did you know dingo guard? Like, that never ends. It would never end. And so that pressure for me as a coach, where I was like, yeah, I'm always putting the student first. I want them to get value for their time, for their money, for their effort. I've got to bring a new one and I've got to bring another one and another one. But you can see that they're not picking any of it up. You can see that it's not transferring to their habits when they're on the mat. So it's, I myself, as the coach, I'm 100% reconciled that this is going to be better for my students long term, short term, medium term, long term. But I think, look, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. But I have had some older, more like coloured belts, higher belts, come and be like, we just want details. Like we miss the details, or we miss like you giving us expert techniques, or like experts showing us how to do this thing. And so, like, for me as the coach, I'm like, yeah, okay, I hear that and I appreciate that. But, like, I think you having that technique and me showing you this cool whoopsie-doozy thing, you're not going to be able to, you wouldn't use that. Like, you're probably not going to use that, but it feels cool. So me, like, sometimes I've been lately, in the couple of times that I have had that feedback, like, lifting the lid back and being like, you know, I think overall you're going to get more out of it. You're going to grow, and I'm seeing growth here. And the reason why I'm doing this is X, Y, and Z. And you receiving those techniques and that feeling of like a transaction taking place, I think that feeling of growth and that feeling of like improvement as a grappler, that's going to overtake that feeling of a transaction taking place. I have had those conversations before, but it's still a challenge point for me. Like it's only happened a couple of times, but maybe it's the overthinker in me. I think it's like that. The thing with this approach is, I think time is going to be the biggest advocate in terms of like, if you can have a member step back and look at the progress that they've made in a certain amount of time, they would be like, holy shit, I'm a much better grappler now. But it's occasionally a challenge for me to like get them to see that point of view and be stuck in that old method of thinking a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if you've had those conversations come up before, especially when you were making the transition.
I mean, so for me, you know, I will have people like, oh, you know, it's more so now what I find it is the desire for us to go back to something. You know, it's not really that they miss certain details, but you know, like it's been a while since X, because everything is sort of general. You know, like a lot of practice is fairly general, except for really submissions. You know, submissions are probably the most discrete part of practice and the way they are. You know, so it's like, okay, how do I rotate through all of the arm in strangles in a timely way so that this person doesn't feel like it's been a year since they've worked on darces? Because like it might be a year. If you just look at all the arm in strangles, you can probably think of, you know, there's arm in strangles with the legs, there's arm in strangles with the arms, there's square on behind them, beside, you know, it's like, there's a lot. So how do I cover that? That is the most common sort of challenge point that I find with students is, you know, they want, like, they're okay and they understand the process and, you know, learning and building skills because they can tell they're getting better, you know. It's more so, it's been a while since we've done that. Or it's like, man, it was really cool when we were like working a lot of like Berimbolo wedge type scenarios. It's like, you know, it's that I find is one of the biggest challenges. It is the big macro plan of touching exchange, because I think it's also sort of a challenge of the all levels from sometimes is like those exchanges that are only relevant for 1 in 5 grapplers who have enough of the foundation built. It's like, okay, so I can see you need to scratch an itch, because it does happen in your exchanges, because now you're good and all these other things, you know? But then I try and balance against, well, my other thought is, can I focus on all the things that will let you go to YouTube, Fanatics, Instagram, whatever, and be able to see things and understand how they're working or what's important. And that's sort of what I try and communicate to people now when those type of things come up. Like, I missed the key details. I'm like, dude, me too. But it'll be great because you can keep someone pinned all the time now. You're pretty great at getting arms away. You can, you know, like, I'm trying to give you the 80% skills so you can stack whatever sorcery on top of it that you want. And I think that's more, because like, man, it's actually really cool. Like I have white belts who I know for sure are learning a gang of shit on YouTube. And it's cool though because they can actually do it. It's not like, what I recall, like you try and do a bunch of stuff from YouTube and you just come in confused, nothing works anyways. But now like they know how to grapple and manipulate another person and control their own body because of these sort of like core things. So they can do some stuff off an Instagram reel or whatever, which I think is awesome. Like that should be sort of one of our goals is how can I prepare you so that you can see other movement solutions and figure out, oh, I can see how that might work. Now I'll go try, and play with that a little bit more. But 100% though, going back, that feeling you're feeling is so normal. And I think it continues because here, I've been doing it for like 2 years-ish, and I'm like, is there a place where maybe I do need to sneak in this or that? Because we've all been told a detail that made like a light bulb moment for us. And that's the thing. That's the truth that you have to recognize. Like, I know that's true. I know there is big value sometimes in that little thing. Because I'm sure you can think of like one thing around, like, oh, I never even thought of that, made a huge difference. It's like, okay, so how do we navigate that? It is an ongoing challenge, of those little things. I'm right there with you.
Look, I think I totally agree. I think for me, I try to leave sometimes, especially during open rounds. I try to have a bit of space between rounds. I find, especially when I was coming up, we've got a bunch of brown belts at our academy, purple belts, etc. too. So I think those little conversations after a roll, that's invaluable. You know what I mean? Like, how did you do that thing? Oh, I did X. I did this. Have you seen this? And I'm more than happy to let those conversations take place. I don't know what your thoughts are, but sometimes we'll have like experienced purple belts, brown belts, like in these games. Sometimes I'll set a task focus, and they've got some techniques, right? They've got a few in their arsenal, and they can bing bang bong pull it off. And then sometimes I'll spend time during the round trying to teach the more inexperienced player that technique that they just did, right? And sometimes initially I felt, bro, just stick to the constraints, play the game, right? Let the experience teach the newer person. But now I kind of I don't mind. Like, I don't mind if they want to teach more. I desire the conversation in the room and the sharing of ideas more than I do of like just shut up and try to play the game, right? I'm happy for conversation to happen. I'm happy for sharing of ideas because I think, like you said, we've all received those little nuggets here and there. And you can't really control when and where they're going to come about. I'm happy for that to occur, but I would rather the conversation, and I would rather encourage an environment in the room where people are talking and sharing ideas and solutions. So I kind of just I'll let it be. I'll just let them play it out. Let them chat. If the purple belt wants to show this thing while we're playing the game, okay, it's fine. You know what I mean? It is what it is. I'm sure you would have had that too to some degree.
Yeah. I actually hate that shit. Okay. Reason I hate that, okay, is I feel, at least every time I've seen it happen, the person never does any better. The person receiving that info never does any better, and I just see them get further and further from taking action most times. Because usually it's totally out of like a good place that the senior student wants to
100%.
give this person a way to do the thing or do this thing. But then, like, I watch the person and the person is frozen almost. Most times. They're thinking about how do I do that actually now?
Yeah.
And then they got no touches. Yeah. They didn't interact with a thing. They got all the way in here versus all the way, out into the body. That's my big thing with that sometimes. Like, every time I see it, it's usually not good. It usually
I totally agree. But it's like, I don't know, for the overarching but the overarching thing in the room of like conversation and sharing of ideas, I just don't know for myself, because sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to try to just relax, just play the game. But then I'm like, I don't want to stamp out conversation, and I don't want to stamp out sharing of ideas. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes it's like, yeah, not the lesser of two evils, but I prioritize conversation, sharing of ideas, open forum than I do more so strict adherence to shutting up, do the game. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It's a challenge. It's a challenge point, but like I agree. There are times where I'm like, far out, just stop. Like I don't need to see that thing right now. But I don't know. I'm not too sure how to handle it.
For me, I think that comes from like, okay, so to clarify though, I don't actually like intervene and stop them from doing their thing. It's your party. You can cry if you want to. I don't care. Do whatever you want to do. For me though, I think of it as like a coach / owner looking at this person trying a new thing. We're making it real complex and making them feel like they really can't do it. So for me, that's where it comes from. Like we were doing like some half guard stuff, and it could be a very simple thing for them to just fuck around, find out, and play with, but they felt like they had to do a certain order of operations, and then they would just mostly do nothing now going forward, or they spent the entire time not actually like engaging with the stimulus. So I'm gonna let it happen. I'm not gonna like intervene, let's say, but then like, you know, it just I know it's not helpful for that person yet, because there's usually someone who's really new inside of 2 weeks or something. Like they're getting like, depends on what it's like too, you know, like is it every game with this person all class that you've done that? Because now you've just made them do nothing, you know, like. But I do really love creating an atmosphere where people share stuff and they do stuff and they, you know, communicate feedback, whatever. I just want to make sure people can still engage with the material rather than regress and think that there's a way to do a thing, or not a way to do things. There are ways to do things, right? There are ways that work. They're robust. They're resilient. They are, you know, 9 out of 10 times. That's a great way to achieve exactly what we're focused on, and that's legit. You know, and I'm not mad at you trying to share that. But the difference between like you and I and a student is you and I know you'll probably quit trying to layer the details after the third time, and they haven't. You know, your student is very excited to help this person, and they will try and get them there 12 times in a row. You know, like it's just little things like that I'm like, I know this guy would have more fun if you just like encourage them to smash you, or you know, like little things like that. But it's cool. I don't mind. You know, I don't really mind. It's maybe I sound like I mind more than I do.
Years? Do you still get that now after having done this approach for 2 years? Do you still get that happening, or not so much?
Yes and no. Yeah, I mean it happens, but not much. Not much. It's gonna be. It'll vary. It'll usually depend on like. And I get it. Some days you aren't in the mood to train a ton. It's like, this is fun. I can show this guy some stuff while we're doing the round. And that's cool. And again, it's their party, right? They can do their things. But way less than we used to. Like in the beginning, pretty common for like experienced or more experienced, even if it's just by a little bit. Like, oh, this is how you can do that. Just try this, you know. But now less so. But also, I'm trying to take that on myself more. It's like, I need to be better at task simplification so that they don't need to ask for help. That it's pretty apparent how to do the thing, right? So what could I be doing better to make it, you know, more within reach, that they don't have to throw up the SOS, save me, you know, that it should be easy enough. And then I think of that, you know, reflectively too.
I agree. I think I'm more reflecting the last 6 months as a coach than I have the previous however many years. And I think that's like, you can only use this method or this approach if you're trying to like reflect on sessions, go back, and I remember speaking to Sam, and just now every session I'm trying to write down what worked, what didn't work, what language I used, etc., etc. If I want to be a good coach, which is what I want to be, I don't think I'm there yet, right? But like, I want to be the best coach I can possibly be, and reflecting back, looking back at what you could have done better is a big part of that. So, yeah, it's a challenge. I don't think, especially at, I think, purple belt, I think, you know, if we're still doing this in a year and I'm still getting certain, like, people doing it now and then, I think, because, you know, purple belts it's only really purple belts that do it. You know, purple belt's that funny age in jiu-jitsu. It's like, I know a bunch of shit. I can't wait to share it. You know what I mean? I find it's purple belts that mostly do that stuff, but yeah, got to be better, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, because like, what am I doing that's creating the opportunity where this person feels that lost? You know, and that's just all I think of. But you also have to like temper. It's like, oh, or is anyone really even that lost, or is it that the person on bottom doesn't have the challenge point they need, so it's not engaging? So they're like, I guess I'll show you so you can try and do something to me that'll make me have to try. You know, that's the other side too. Sometimes I think, like, ooh, are these guys too far away in skill and experience that it can only be fun for this guy if he gives this guy something to really clearly try? You know, it could be that too. And I try and keep that in mind as well, you know, because
Do you partner people, or do you let them select their own partners?
I generally let people select their own partners for the most part. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I might break up people if they've been like partners every day for 2 weeks. I'm like, bro, you need a different human to interact with for the sake of your jiu-jitsu and development, you know? But sometimes it's like, yo, I just love hanging out with my buddy, you know, and we're going to spar and train, you know? Yeah, I used to be like a hardcore partner, you know, and like really try and navigate that. But the social side is so important to the long game. You know, I want to let people have that fun. And I also want to sort of let those relationships build how they're going to build, you know?
Community is what keeps them around. You know what I mean? It's jiu-jitsu, but that community, that is a massive, massive part of what's going to keep someone walking through the door. So yeah, I'm big for letting them select their own partners. But I think there are times, I have been lately, just like if I notice a big mismatch in terms of skill, I occasionally will try to switch the partners, or maybe you go with you, etc. Or like we have a large, like we've got a very large array of different body types. We've got a large array of females that train with us. We're very, very fortunate that we have a large group of females who train with us. And sometimes just as a result of the partner switching and people are trying to go with new partners, you can just see that there's if it's a brand new 21-year-old white belt dude who's just walked out of the gym, he's probably not going to be best to go with the mother of two kids who's just walked in the door. You know what I mean? So sometimes I'll be like, okay, you go with you and you go with you. In those instances, I'll make a switch. But for the most part, that community effect of switching partners, not getting stuck in just training with the same people, it's a massive, massive thing in the room.
Yeah. So like when I do like my little coaching clinic things, like I always do this exercise where I ask people to think about like, okay, just think of your whole experience in jiu-jitsu, your big memories, big moments that have carried you forward and have made you stick with it. There's generally two things that whatever everyone says fall into. It has to either do with progress, whether that's ranking up, winning a tournament, seeing weight loss, whatever it is, something progress oriented, or it's something connection oriented. They shared an experience with someone, they made a friend, they did this tournament together, you know, all like those are the two drivers of everyone, pretty much in every activity. Those are the two things that make you do it for a long time. So it's like you have to understand that, make that a big core part of your whole coaching philosophies. Every day, how can I make sure there was progress and connection felt by like everyone on my floor while keeping them safe? Those are like my big three: safety, progress, connection. Like that has to be what influences all of your coaching, you know? So how can I, you know, set them up for that? And that's why sometimes like, partner switches are great. More connection, more community, you know, get that going, you know. Open mat is great for that reason. You know, like I don't run our classes back to back. So before my class, there's a little 15-minute gap so you guys can chill, shoot the shit before class, you know, like all those little decisions, little things of how you sort of craft your room and your experience. But yeah, that whole, I'm down to let people be humans. They are humans, and we are humans too. You know, we want to make sure it's a great experience for everyone.
In terms of your like higher belts, like your brown belts or whatnot, people like working towards that black belt. Has anything changed for you in terms of how you would like coach them, like working towards that black belt? Because like I know from my perspective coming up, I was like asking coaches for like, what do I need to work on, coach? Or what do I need to do? I'm trying to work towards my black belt. And I was either told, just keep doing what you're doing, which doesn't really help whatsoever. Or it was like, technique prescription. I think you need to add this, or like try to keep doing that, right? So now as I'm like trying to have a different approach to how I view grappling and how I view people's skill sets, do you think it leans more? So now I find I'm just trying to like nudge people out of like, I don't want to like, without using buzzwords, but like nudging people out of attractive valleys sometimes is probably like one of the ways now I'm coaching a higher belt. Like you have a tendency to this, try to work towards that kind of stuff. Is that what you've found? Have you changed that at all since you've, in the last couple of years, since you've changed your coaching methods?
You know, truth, yeah, that's an interesting one to think about, because for me, I've sort of been really coaching my students that asking generic stuff is the worst question you could ask, right? Like, what should I work on? That sucks, bro. Don't even ask me that question. Not like I'm sounding really militant, but I'm like, that's not a good question. I can't give you anything meaningful to that question. I'm gonna give you lip service so you feel heard and seen. Because we all know. Just think of like to a different scenario. You know, you roll with someone and they ask you, "What could I work on?" Or "How was that?" It's like, I don't know, focus on getting underhooks more. You know, like you'll just say something that isn't helpful, but if they can get specific, then I can guide you, you know? So lots of times those conversations are going to be, how can I get you to ask me a better question? Because I don't really, like, for me, I don't really care if you only do 3 things forever. Bernardo Faria did like 5 moves in his life, and he's one of the greatest grapplers ever. You know, so I'm not too concerned about someone having big breadth unless they're an instructor. Then you have to have breadth, right? But if you're just a player, then that doesn't really matter. But I find those conversations, you know, yeah, they might be like prescriptive in the sense that, like, you know, how do you feel in like leg entanglements? Maybe that's something you try and funnel towards just for a bit. Get more experience when it's there. Honestly, that's really the only thing that I ever have to tell people to work on if they're getting there, because it's like when they started, it wasn't as important as it is now, you know? But like, I find I really try and get them to ask me the specific question, you know, like, because, you know, it's hard to think of like, where do I want to guide you? I don't really care what your jiu-jitsu looks like. Is it effective? Is it efficient? Are you having fun? Can you do it? You know, do you understand why you're doing it? If you have gaps in some of that stuff, then maybe we can talk about it, dive into it. But I'm way less prescriptive. Like, I'm not like, oh, you need to add Delhi Hiva guard. You can get by without ever playing Delhi Hiva guard.
For sure. Yeah,
there's whole teams that don't play half guard, but are the best teams on earth. Right, you don't need a good half guard. Like AOJ, nobody plays half guard. They you know, like, okay, so I know you don't need to know that. You just need to be good at your stuff, right? So I'm way less prescriptive in that sense, because it's just about their game, their style, and just like, if you have problems, I can tell you what you should think about to maybe help with those problems. But I'm way less prescriptive than I used to be. Maybe I never really was, you know, in that sense. Yeah, I think I'm real open. My big thing, like, this is sort of going somewhere else, but when it comes to like people in my room, my goal is to create like an engaged learner who is looking at what's happening on their own and has a good question. Like every night, I'll probably have a student ask me a question. I'm like, that question's not very good, bro. Like, be more specific. Like, what's happening? What's not going well? You know, this. Great. Now we can really talk about something of, you know, importance. You know, and maybe that's just me. I've been really trying to make them ask better questions, because otherwise I gotta bullshit you, and I don't really want to bullshit you. Ultimate waste of time is if we feel obliged. It'd be way better for me to be like, you need a better question. And sometimes like, I don't really have a better question. I'm like, perfect, then keep doing what you're doing. If you really didn't, you know, because sometimes people feel like they should just ask for feedback or guidance on something, and it's like,
it's like getting FaceTime with the coach. That can be a thing too, right? People will just feel like, what do I need to work on? It's just like trying to show the coach that they're trying to improve, which I appreciate that. I think it comes from me as a coach. I'm always trying to watch what's happening. I'm trying to like know what people's games are. I take take this shit seriously. You know what I mean? Like, this is my job, but also, apart from my wife and kids, I love jiu-jitsu more than anything else. So it's just like, and it's not that you have to hit a certain standard. It's nothing to do with that. I just want you to get jiu-jitsu because I love it and I know it's going to be good for you and I want you to enjoy the process and the improvement and whatnot. So it's like, I watch everyone, I pay attention as much as I can to everyone's jiu-jitsu. So then it's for me as a coach, if I sit down with a brown belt or my blue belt or what words can I say that's going to have them think about their jiu-jitsu in a different way? You know what I mean? Because I talk a lot to our group about trying to take ownership of your jiu-jitsu. It's just like, take ownership. It's your thing. You can add to that thing what you want to add to that thing. You can grow this thing in whatever way you want. So then it's like, I'm trying to have a way where when I sit down and I engage with someone about their jiu-jitsu, generally it's like, what are you working on right now? Or it's these things to get them to think about their jiu-jitsu. But then, if I do get what do you think I need to work on? Sometimes, there's a bit of lip service. But sometimes if I've noticed tendencies, it's like, I think you give up this too much, or I think you could try to be on top more, or I think you're going to try to get to front headlock too much. You try to work on guillotine too much. I think you could I think there's a little bit of a sweet spot as a coach where I have to know everyone's game enough that I can give them some element of feedback instead of such broad strokes. But I don't want to be where it's like, have you done a De La Riva guard before? I don't think it needs to be that exact, right? But I think there is, as a coach, that you've got to try to know your students' games and be able to have something to add to them tangible that they can take away and work on. There's a sweet spot there, and I'm not sure I found it.
Yeah, I think the big thing is how can you be good at asking the questions, though, right? Again, this is sort of like how when we're trying to prompt them to action on the mats, like how can we prompt them for reflection and to really look at hey, so what's usually happening in a lot of your rounds, or tell me how are people usually passing your guard right now? I'll point them to common fault points of things hey, so if you get subbed, how would I catch you? What's going on there? I might try and ask questions more along that line because then that'll help them think about real things.
What's actually happening?
Yeah. So that but like you, I do try and know most of what people favor. I can tell you this person's main way they try and pass the guard. Hey, it's mostly body locks. They want to try and get to body locking scenarios as often as possible. I can tell you the way they like to play guard generally. I think that's usually the thing that's most apparent to most coaches is what they like to do in that scenario because it actually is a lot of jiu-jitsu. Because I think that is the most variable part where everyone's personality shines the most is how they pass and how they play guard. Things on the other side of that spectrum tend to be pretty funneled a lot of ways, a lot of when I ask them questions around those type of things too.
Yeah, and you'll prompt those conversations or you just wait for them to come to you with those conversations?
Man, I end every single class with a prompt for people to ask me questions during open mat.
Yeah,
so if you're I want to constantly extend the invite and make sure it's really known that in the open mat, I will roll with you or I will advise you. You can choose. Let's go. I try to make sure that's happening as often as possible. Let them know that I'm accessible. Whether they ask me questions, it's fine. That's on them, but I want to make sure they know that is the sole reason I'm on this mat right now is to help you. So that thing is important. I will seek people out though, usually when they're close to the next level. I want to be hey, are you thinking about what are you thinking about? And if I do a little check and it looks like they're thinking about the right things, I'm great, because that will help you with your goal.
Yeah. You give people feedback in terms of progression to the next belt. You're happy to do that?
Yeah, because honestly, what I think of as progression for belts is pretty simple. I think to be a blue belt, you have to sort of have a style of guard that you want to try and use. I don't really care about effectiveness, but you have a space where you can constantly play. Doesn't mean you're always sweeping or swinging from there, but you're in half guard a lot. You're playing under calf a lot. Your success rate is still so variable just because you're relatively inexperienced, and same thing on the passing side. So that's sort of things that I'm looking for people to have cleared up before they're a blue belt. As they have a style of play, success rate doesn't matter yet for me because there's still just a blue belt, which is still a novice belt more or less. Purple belt, you got to have a game you can impose. I don't know what that is. Is it you are deep half and over under passer? You got to have like something that you can do to most people if you can get there.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm really looking at. And then the jump to brown is really quite arbitrary because people can be a purple belt for like 18 months or 6 years. You know what I mean? Like, it's really variable. But I tend to feel like it's great. Now you have a funnel in every position. Every position meaning just like every range. Hey, they're standing, you have some game. They're kneeling, you have some game. You're supine or you're seated, you have some game. Sort of that thing. A little bit of breadth, but not like, do you know every guard? I don't really need that. I just need you to be able to get things back to where you want more and more consistently.
Yeah.
Because I think the gap from brown to black is like not much. It used to be more of a gap, but really I think it's just time on task is really all that changes from purple to black belt is who can stay on task identifying that the most important issue and solving it, efficiently. Is all that really changes. Because like me and my blue belts probably know a lot of the same jiu-jitsu. It's just I'm doing the first right thing more often than they are.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation just in terms of like providing that feedback. I think I'm more than happy to sit a white belt 4 stripes down and be like, look, I think we're not quite there yet ahead of a grading and feel like I think we need to like look in these areas. If we can keep doing these things for X amount of time, we'll get to that next level, but let's keep working on those things. I think at least in my experience, it was always like, don't you ever fucking ask a question about where you sit. If you ask, that's terrible. They're like, don't you dare. And it's 2024. And as a coach, if I'm not coaching you towards progression, like belts, whether we like it or not, that's a sign of progression. If I'm not coaching you towards that and giving you relatively clear indicators of what you can do to get to that point, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing as a coach, right? That's a failure upon me as a coach, less of a failure upon you as a student. So I am happy to kind of sit down and be like, look, I think we could do this. I think we need to look at this. If we try to think about these things, work towards that as a goal, and we'll get to that next point. And I don't know if that's, I know my coaches would be like, how dare you? Elio Gracie is turning in his grave right now. What are you doing kind of thing?
Yeah, but you got to create that type of atmosphere. You got to create an open environment where people can communicate, where they can ask questions, where you can, and they deserve that type of interaction. Because they're doing hard shit and they need some guidance, and that's great. Like, I will never shy away from a question. It doesn't matter. We will always do it. I will ask you stuff. I think it's really important because that is, if I'm going to create engaged learners, I gotta show them how to engage with the process of learning. Right? What does troubleshooting look like? How do you ask good questions? All that fun stuff. Yeah, man. Gino, is there anything on your mind that you really want to dive into that we didn't get a chance to touch on a little bit?
No, look, I think we covered a few areas. I'm pretty happy we covered enough stuff. I don't have any more. I think I asked the questions I probably wanted to ask you. Yeah, I'm always interested in that transition period, mostly because like we're still, I guess, a little bit in that transition period. So it's always like gathering what other coaches' experiences were like when they made that transition. It's easier for me because with my wife, we own the academy. So it's like, I could just be like, that's it, done, we're doing it. Not that I don't care, but this is like, I have to stick to my convictions as a coach. This is going to be best for us moving forward. That's where we're going in terms of that. Whereas someone else who was like, teaching a couple of classes a week, it's going to be harder for them to get that by their head coach if their head coach isn't all about it. But I know a few people like that, which is a bit tough, but that transition period is always interesting to me.
The transition period is an interesting thing because there's so many different things to consider. But yeah, it's really tough for some people who can't make an impact on what training looks like at their school at a big enough scale, whereas when you're the owner, you can shoot your shot. All the risk is on you anyways. It's all on you. So you got to go at it with some conviction.
Yeah. You have to. You can't Yeah, I think there's been plenty of points where it's like, yeah, like not like what am I doing? Always am I doing the right thing? That's like a daily process for me. But like never a point where it's like, oh, should I go back? It's like this is you got to stick to what you believe in. You got to back yourself, and
I feel a lot of those should I go back moments are like, ooh, it's really a skill deficit for me is what I look at that like. It's like, the reason I want to go back is because I feel like I can't get this to happen. Right.
Yeah.
So what is it? I know, is it I don't know how to make a good activity? Is it maybe I'm aiming for stuff that's way too representative and I can play lower on the scale and, get what I want to happen? I find that that's like one of the biggest challenges is you got to be like pretty skilled at like assessing and evaluating because there's many things I'm like, oh, if I just showed this quickly, boom, problem solved. But what's the right dose and how can I make it as engaging and as valuable for everyone as possible?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as well, like, yeah, it's plus it is. I feel like it's a lot easier because you have those days where you're tired. You've had a morning class, a lunch class. It's 5 o'clock. You've just done kids' classes, and it's like, all right, I got to do this beginners class now. And it's like I'm trying to be in the moment, live, engaged, seeing what's happening in the room and responding like accordingly. But then it's like, it could be so much easier if I just showed a quick like knee cut past the side control. Do you know what I mean? Occasionally when I'm tired and I'm just lacking the mental like bandwidth to be as engaged as I know I need to be, that's the only time those thoughts come up. Where it's like, what if we just did a 6-step armbar from close guard, baby? Let's go. Do you know what I mean? Like that would be easier, but yeah, we don't do it.
Yeah, I feel you, man. we've all been there, I'm sure, at some point. It's like, it would be so much easier if I could just switch course or jump around. It's also like someone's like, but I'm on a plan for this week and next week. Got to stick to it, even though, like, you feel some type of way in that moment. But that's why you're a good coach, bro. You're sticking to it. You're trying to make it happen for your students. Give them the best.
Gotta try, yeah, you gotta try.
Yeah, man. Gino, this was a ton of fun, dude. I'm really happy we got to connect. You got to kick your morning off hanging out with me, so hopefully that was cool. It was a fun chat. We did cover a lot when I look at my notes of sort of where our conversation was going. We were all over the place. I think there's definitely some good stuff folks can pick out of this for sure.
Appreciate it, dude.
Well,
appreciate
thanks.
your work too, man. Yeah, appreciate all the work you do. Like, honestly, as someone like starting out doing like trying to use this approach, like some of the stuff that you put out, that you continue to put out, it's really palatable. It's easy to understand and it makes sense. So yeah, I just keep doing what you're doing, man. I really appreciate it.
Nice. Awesome. I appreciate it. I always tell myself I'll try and put more stuff out there, but I'm like, this recording a podcast is way easier than making my own content, bro. I'm just joking. No, but yeah, I appreciate that so much. And yeah, man, these conversations are one of the things that I've found help so many people because like they can just see themselves in one of the guests or in the conversation. Like I've been right there, so it's not abnormal to feel that way or to have that struggle point or there is so much variety. Because I think one thing also just in this space is like a closing comment is because it was really brought to light like mostly through Greg. It's sort of like, is there just a one way to do it? But as you hear and talk to so many different coaches with different rooms, different size of student bases, different goals for the student base, you can see like, there's many ways to do this. And as you get deeper and deeper into coaching, you really recognize that. Like, man, there's so much to it. It's not a one size fits all, and there's unfortunately a giant spectrum of ways to make it work. But that's what makes coaching so engaging. It's an alive practice each and every day.
That's what we're doing, right? That's what we're doing. I think 100%. That's why I appreciate what you do, because I started out and it was Greg because he was the loudest voice in the room, and he's got success. He does it very, very well, and so you think that's the way it has to be done, but that's not the way. That's a way to do it, and that's the way that suits his room with his athletes. But I think you're doing a super good job, like all the other guys in this space who are like communicating different messages or different ways of doing it. I think that is super helpful to all the other coaches out here trying to see the value in this methodology, or just like trying to figure out how they apply it to their room. So yeah, appreciate what you're doing, man.
Awesome, man. Well, maybe we'll wrap there then. Perfect, man. I'm going to go ahead, hit stop, and then we'll let it upload as it needs to.
Beautiful.